In this video, we'll discuss fixed versus fluid page layouts. A fixed page layout uses preset values for page width and HTML elements contained on the page. For example, you may give your body the width of 960 pixels, and if you resize the page, the body's content area will always remain 960 pixels regardless of the width of the browser. The issue with a fixed page layout is that different devices render layouts differently. For example, on a desktop browser with a large screen, if you resize the width of the browser to a width that is smaller than the static value you defined for your layout, the content will be moved off the page and the user will have to scroll horizontally to view the content on the page. And on mobile devices with smaller screens, the content will be scaled automatically, requiring the user to zoom in to view the page. A fluid page layout, on the other hand, uses relative values for page width and HTML elements contained on the page. For example, you may give the body of your page a width of 90%. In this case, as you resize the browser, the content resizes based on the width of the browser, but it will always take up a maximum of 90% of the viewable page area. Now, let's jump over to VS Code and take a look at these two implementations. Starting with the HTML, I have the fixed page layout on the left and the fluid on the right. You can see the HTML at this point is exactly the same. I have semantic HTML elements for the page's header, section, nav, and footer, and if we expand each to look at the differences, we'll see that the header is the same, the footer is the same, the nav is the same, but there's a slight difference with the first paragraph contained in the section. In the fluid layout, I've added an ID attribute with the value of description. This will be used for control of the descriptive text within the page on the fluid layout. Now, let's take a look at the CSS for the fixed page layout. And before we dive into the CSS, let's comment out the link in the HTML head and see what this page looks like without any CSS applied. So, without any CSS, the content displayed in the order that the elements are written in the code, as we would expect. If I resize the page, the content is displayed in a fluid manner, but this is controlled by the browser itself. Again, we're not using any CSS here. If we uncomment the CSS, save the file, and reload the page, we see that the fluidity provided by the browser has gone away, and we're in the position where we now need to scroll to see the content on the page. Looking at the CSS, we'll see that I've given the body a width of 960 pixels. Now, that constrains the width to 960 pixels regardless of the width of the browser. That's why when I resize the browser to a width smaller than 960 pixels, I had to scroll to the right to view the content on the page. In fact, if we go to Developer Tools and make this a little larger so we can work with it, and I hover my mouse over the body in Developer Tools, the blue highlighted area is the body. The background is the entire width of the viewable page. But as we can see in the box model, the body is constrained to 960 pixels wide, regardless of how wide the browser width is. Of note, I've given the body a margin of 0 and auto, and that's what centers the content within the body. The header, I've given a width of 100%, and that's actually headed in the direction of a fluid layout. It's not a statically defined value like 960 pixels. It's relative based on the width of the container. However, the container in this instance is the body, which is constrained to 960 pixels. If I resize this, expand the body, and move my mouse over the header, we'll see that it takes up 100% of its container's viewable area. The container is the body, which is 960 pixels. Moving to the section, we'll see I've given it a width of 540 pixels and floated it right on the page. In Developer Tools, if we click on Section, we'll see in the box model the width of 540, and the content within is constrained within the 540 pixels that we've assigned to the section. The nav has a width of 160 pixels and is floated to the left, and for the footer, I've cleared both left and right and aligned the text right within its container. The container, again, is the body, which is 960 pixels. So all of the content on this page, whether it's the header, the section, the elements contained within the section, the nav, or the footer, are constrained inside of the 960 pixels that I've assigned as the width of the body. Switching our attention to the fluid layout, we'll remember that in the HTML, the only difference is that I added an ID attribute to the first paragraph contained within the section. Again, this is to give a finer level of control to the text that's displayed within that paragraph. Looking at the styles in the CSS, we'll see that all of the numerical values have percentages. Nothing has a static value, like 960 pixels. They're all percentages of their container's viewable area. And in this case, the container is the body, which is 90% of the viewable area. So in Developer Tools, if I hover over the body, we'll see that the blue highlighted area is the viewable area of the body on the page, which takes up 90% of the page width. Again, the margin 0 auto centers the content within the container. The header, as we saw in the last example, takes up 100% of its container, which is the body. The section takes up 70% of the display area, and the nav takes up 30%. So combined, the section and the nav take up 100% of the viewable area, which is 90% of the page. The footer in this case takes up 75% of the body. And if we look at the CSS, we'll see that I've given the HTML element with the ID of description, which was the paragraph in the section, a width of 50% of its container. If I expand the section and hover over the description, we'll see that the text takes up 50% of the viewable area within that container. And all of these values combined, the 90%, the 70, the 30, the 75, and so on, give this layout the fluid aspect so that when the user resizes the browser, the content on the page is fluid and visible without having to scroll to the right.